we are going to start. And up next, we're going to have a panel where we're going to introduce initiatives centered on researching policies and regulatory framework to reduce methane emissions and how these are aligned with the international good practices. We're also going to understand the current status of climate negotiations and the update process of NDCs. And for that, we would like to invite María Leticia Rodas. She's from OLADE. She's going to be the moderator. I would like to also welcome Mario Cárdenas from the Stockholm Environmental Institute, Andrés Pirazzoli from Resilum, and Ricardo Pareja from the Inter-American Federation of Cement.
Muy buenos días a todos.
Good morning, and thank you for being here. For the panelists, Ricardo, Mario, Andrés, thank you for this initiative. Yesterday, we were hearing about many initiatives, processes happening in the region. Many of those have many expectations looking into the future, and others would be a reference for new ones. This panel encourages actions related to methane. And our intention here is for the panelists to have a 10-minute presentation. We want this panel to be an open panel. We want to have comments from the audience, maybe questions, in order to consider other ways of thinking, remarks, and going into transaction and mitigation to methane. We would like to give the go-ahead to Ricardo. Please, could you guys help us with the presentation? Good morning. Thank you, OLADE, for inviting me here. We needed to run, by the way, to be here, but here we are. We have Inter-American Cement Federation. We are representing the industrial production of cement from the north of Mexico going into the Patagonia in Argentina and Chile. We have more than 270 plants. You can see our operation map. We have been classified as a global industry in operations, but we have a regional management for decarbonization, and within that decarbonization, we have a branch associated to methane. And one of the opportunities coming from this sector, of course, we consume or we use fuel, raw materials. We have distributed all of our actions throughout the region. That's why any scalability of the project will be total. We are a region with 255 kilograms of cement per capita, where the average or the mean is near 500 kilograms. So we are in deficit on the use of cement, you would say. And the last indicator, if we want to discuss the 200 million tons of cement going into energy, it would be coal equivalent that we should use. This is added to a projection on growth up to 2050. It generates a highly energetic demand with a growing projection because there's no substitute for cement on the development of a region. This is an image that we always show. This shows the difference of cement stocks between a developed country and a developing country. The person that lives in a developed country has 30 tons of cement. That's why there's connectivity, climate resiliency, efficiencies in the building. And the ones that don't, basically this will be in a region, it will be 10 tons of cement. We have a deficit of 20 tons. If we want to close this gap, we need to consider what policies are including, for example, potable water. We need connectivity of the roads. 20% of the roads are paved, and the deficit of housing quality is over 50%. That means half of population is living in these deficit households. So the challenge would be how to close this gap, adapt to the climate change, and placing into the market a product that would mitigate CO2. So 80% of the global footprint is associated to cement consumption, and not because of the intensity of cement. We could see the growth on production of cement worldwide in the last 100 years. And for us, this would be the key to understand what's going to happen in the upcoming 100 years. We're looking of this development in learning on our product. This is a millenary product. We have the Roman Colosseum that has many years, but if there's wars, we use cement. If there's reconstruction, we use cement. If there's economic wealth, cement as well. If there's any type of recession, we use cement to reactivate economy. So all of this is included in these statistics. Lessons learned would be in the infrastructure that we provide. Energetic transformation requires cement for methane plants. Basically, aeolic generator parks would require cement. Human activity requires cement. And one of the last studies shows that the whole terrestrial globe has a coverage of cement. So this is a replaceable element. If we require wood to do this, we would require 7 Earths, you would say, or 7 globes. These are the indicators from China of more than 15,000 kilotons of cement. We produce more than 7 times of what we produce in the region, and this shows how China in 20 years was able to close the growth gaps. And we could see the growth phenomenon from China. If we want to close gaps, we need to have a similar phenomenon in a region. This is not necessarily everybody's view. So the way of thinking this would be, how are we going to decarbonize ourselves? This was introduced by the industry of cement after 3 years of technical studies on how to decarbonize Latin America by keeping economical sustainability and providing a product in a more competitive way. We cannot make a product as expensive as possible as Norway, for example. Norway definitely can take a growth of 3 times its cost of cement, but in a region, it would involve less development, less infrastructure, and we would have to keep the same progress. If we divide our strategy in products for future efficiency and closing the CO2 gap, we have done this by auditing the cement in the sanitary backfills, which is the focus of our presentation. You could see decarbonization for the electrical world. We're going to go for 34 electrical terawatts. In any industry, it could be 80% of our emissions, but in our case, we're not even 6% of the total emissions. Our investment would be in the cement processes more than the electrical process. For us, technology, and we always want to explain it this way, we're trying to value waste, but we want to avoid methane. The way would be, how are we going to contribute to methane by having a co-pressing technology, which would be the evaluation of waste. And actually, we are forecasting with a rate of 20% of energy that this derives from the waste derivatives. And our consideration would be to start thinking about urban waste. Thinking about biomethane, we are a way of using energy in a more direct way. We use agricultural waste and we transform it into energy. We avoid CO2 from fossil fuels, but at the same time, we start working on the methane agenda, which is what gathered us here today. How are we going to have a transparent methodology to show this to the world and to generate some profit in an economy which is developing such as ours in order to avoid having waste problems? And this would be our strategy based on a diagnosis of 2019 related to the problems of waste in Latin America. Latin America, it's a region where a third of this waste is not even collected, unlike 4% in Europe, with a poor management of waste. Actually, sanitary backfill would be the structural solution. But if we grab 1/3 of this backfill, we would increase this part of solution. If we look at Europe, looking into this hierarchy, we were able to think that the energy solutions were key here. In Latin America, we have the possibility of having renewable deployment, but waste to energy didn't have a way to enter there. So the industry of cement would probably enter there. In Austria, for example, 90% of energy comes from waste, and it helps us with the urban waste. Europe, with 50% of co-processing, is giving us the key of what could happen in Latin America. And we have an opportunity of avoiding methane in backfills, but also avoiding microplastics in dams, self-combustion of this sanitary backfill. And it integrates a lot of solutions going from sanitary to climate changes, going to waste management. So when we remove a truck that was having sanitary backfill and I transform it into energy in this cement plant, I am doing three phenomena in this balance. First of all, how much methane are we going to get? Because this depends on the composition of the waste, the technical configuration of the backfill, climate conditions of such backfill. What would I need to do for this truck to deviate and go to this cement plant? And also, what are we displacing? I'm transferring coal. What would be the efficiency of this cement plant? We will have to get the balance, and we believe that this is a positive balance. When we value biomass, we have a ton of CO2 on neutrality, but methane could actually contribute to more units on its magnitude associated to biomass in a cement plant. So we're finding an equation where we could actually have 3 times the use of carbon thanks to methanization or having methane. What are the consequences? Well, most of all, we are working on a methodology that we unified the phenomenon of sanitary backfill in Latin America. Well, basically, we're alone here in Latin America because Europe is not going to have this policy. If we don't have this methodology globally, it's never going to happen. When we were working with Africa and India, the priority of those were having cement for its own development. That's why in Latin America there was a responsibility of generating such methodology. Actually, Luis is here with me, working with our company to develop the methodology in the framework of Article 6. We're going to be pioneer in this. There's a methodology coming from Article 6 replacing MDLs that were operating for more than 20 years. We're going to be one of the first methodologies in the world. Whenever there's icebreakers, we need to be the leaders, and we are hoping to have this year to determine the contribution of co-processing in cement plants and the contribution of sanitary backfill. We're doing pilots to show the efficiency in Quiros, the city of Mexico. Since we have a network of 200 plants, we're going to see where it's good for us to do a technical demonstration. And it would generate a tool, and it would give us the reputation to recognize the national inventory of gases. And also, we're going to be able to transfer such emissions to markets that are going to be able to pay this with credit bonds and execute these projects. But to close the tons of waste in Latin America has a disposal cost. But if you go to a dump, it's zero. But in Europe, for co-processing to be profitable, we pay between 100 and 120 tons per residue in backfill. So that's not going to happen in Latin America. And that's going to make this process to be more effective and for us to go up to 50% in avoiding methane. We are in this path. And the most important thing, and I would like to close with this comment, 70% of cement is being used in the global north. They don't care about methane because they don't have a sanitary backfill problem going into 2050. But up to 2050, 70% of the cement is going to be used in global south with a growth of 10%. That means that we're going to use 70% higher than what we are using now. So we're going to be able to use this in Southeast, in India as well. And that's the role that we have in FICEM, providing transparency in this type of tool and taking a use of these 270 plants because logistically these are close to the sanitary backfill. And there's a reason to that. These cement plants are installed in the inlets of the entries of the cities, and we are close at 50%. And production of cement would be happening at 80% of Latin America. Therefore, the logistics problem is not associated only to urban waste. Just to close, decarbonization of the industry includes products, includes replacement of raw material, energetic efficiencies, fuels with less use of CO2, and there's all of these 13 leverages tools. We are in the agenda of methane, and we want, with this learning of Article 6, to start encouraging other sectors to register these measurements, because this would be clear information for NDCs, and particularly for developing countries, it could give us liability for the projects. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you, Ricardo. And he's the director of the Cement, Inter-American Cement Foundation. And we're going to continue with the Institute of Stockholm.
Hola a todos y todas, buenos días.
Good morning, my name is María Cárdenas. Thank you so much for the chance to participate here. I will try to be as brief as possible. Currently, I'm leading a project entitled Project Emissions Facility in the European Union with potential convergence of public policies related to mitigation of methane in Latin America. Specifically, we are focusing now in 6 countries in the region, who are Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Costa Rica, and Brazil. Thank you so much for the invitation and for allowing me to participate. I can say already that there's not many results just now. It started a couple months ago, but the goal is to try to assess the possible areas of political convergence, gaps, opportunities, and challenges that are found in aligning policies and initiatives in the European Union to reduce methane emissions, and how we can begin aligning efforts for these 6 countries in the region. I won't stop too much here. I will be very specific and clear on what are the 3 sectors that the project is focusing on currently, which are agriculture, waste, and energy. For agriculture, we're focusing specifically on some sectors such as enteric fermentation, waste management, and rice crops. For waste, we have solid waste, as has been mentioned, burning waste material, and lastly, we have wastewater treatment. And lastly, in energy, we're focusing on transportation and energy consumption and production. So for preliminary results, we need to be very clear. We ask that the graphs that you're seeing on screen are showing challenges and learnings that the 6 countries have had to tackle methane mitigation for all the specific 3 sectors. And just to tell you that the greatest cause for emissions of CH4 in the atmosphere for the 6 countries continues being agriculture with 69%, or approximately 80% of the sector emissions come from enteric fermentation, so livestock, basically. Here we're seeing an overview or snapshot of the political regulatory framework that all 6 countries have, which is pretty robust in general lines. Many of the countries still have some specific cases, sectorial plans for mitigation, climate change, and for CH4. As for instance, the case of Chile, where last year it has the agriculture and the energy, and it is about to finish the waste one, but is relatively tightly related to the healthcare sector. That is pretty important and relevant to mention. Argentina is important also because though it doesn't exist as a mandate from the national government in implementation and development for this kind of policy related to methane, it does exist certain initiatives at the sub-regional level, which is the case of the province Neuquén, if I'm not pronouncing it wrong, where they have developed specifically plans for mitigating CH4 in the energy sector. Colombia is a country that stands with a pretty robust regulatory framework and a verification system that's pretty strong as well. But for Colombia and other countries in the region, there are still opportunities presenting in terms of independent verification and who are reporting and how they're reporting emissions specifically for the energy sector. And Costa Rica, just to mention, policies and plans mentioned in the previous presentation, but there's an opportunity here for scalability of those energy capture pilots by the waste sector. And Brazil has specific policies or sector plans for agriculture and the waste sector. A sector plan for greenhouse gases is related to ABC+, but it does not have specifically, like some of the other countries, laws which make mandatory reporting on leak detection and repair. Moving along, I won't delay too much here. This is just to give a global overview of the main outcomes in terms of gaps and challenges that countries find in the energy sector. To mention that we are focusing on consumption, transport, and energy generation. On the other hand, we have best practices. Something important here is that best practices, for instance, Petrobras and Ecopetrol have decided to join the OGMP 2.0 initiative, pretty important, and countries like Brazil, Chile, and Colombia have these initiatives to update transport networks for energy in the country. Again, good practices in terms of Argentina with the development of systems for monitoring and public policies at the sub-regional level for the Neuquén province, not as aligned necessarily with national interests. But on the other end, there are countries in the region that lack development of specific public policies that make mandatory the implementation of leak detection and repair that could potentially be leading to under-regulation and under-reporting in emissions from the energy sector. In terms of agriculture, perhaps I would focus more on the best practices. In these 2 days, we have said much on what is lacking and what we can improve, but in terms of highlighting progress of implementation and regulatory frameworks in countries, the plans and the pilots for biodigesters in Costa Rica and Brazil specifically, in the regions of Paraná and Santa Catalina, are pilots that have been quite successful and are acknowledged in Latin America, that they operate as a baseline and to continue diving deeper in that kind of project implementation. In Embrapa in Brazil and the region, Latin America, and especially the south of Latin America, is too involved with the livestock sector, so many of the strategies being developed related to decreasing methane emissions in the sector are more related to improving the performance of the sector specifically. I won't stop too much here. And in terms of waste, I really like the case of Chile with organic waste. It's a huge programs with funding from countries such as Canada and Switzerland. Brazil also has Sao Paulo and Paraná, like 2 pilot cases in the implementation of biodigesters for capturing CH4 and turning into energy. And Colombia currently has many sector plans in mitigation to climate change, and we can say that right now it is working both on implementation and including mitigation measures for mitigating methane, not only in the energy sector, but also waste in agriculture. And here, this is like the core of the project. This is trying to put to value not necessarily replicability and adjustment of the regulatory framework of countries in the region, but actually how we can adapt and scale up so that the many different political frameworks and willingness to implement that exist were both negative and gaps, but merely on what's presented here is a set of 3 tables that I won't stop too much on, but what we're seeing, what we're trying to assess is what are those common points on convergence that serve to leverage the intervention and alignment of the countries in Latin America and the European Union in terms of how we see financial resources, how to help implement and develop monitoring and verification systems that are much more feasible, cost-effective, and that also serve in the long term, and with what kind of specific mandates or policies and the European Union is being aligned to. These are outcomes in energy. There's 3 specific cases, but perhaps just to finish this presentation, I would like to mention what are those opportunities that are cross-cutting identified to this point. This is a report and a research that is in development. But we have 5 main ones, the first being the opportunity to help to develop reporting and verification frameworks that allow independent verification of the data reported by the institutions, as also helping to develop new conversion factors and adaptability factors for tiers 1, 2, and 3 that IPCC proposes, because countries change in geographic, climate, and social terms. So the south of Chile is not equal as the north. So there are considerations that need to be considered. Definitely, the projects of aerobic digestion is something that is pretty important in terms of both the policy of the mandates in the European Union and this potential that the region in Latin America has to help discouraging CH4 and a bit more in terms of circular economy and waste recovery, and what strategies for tech exchange and 3-party mechanisms to help for there to exist like an exchange of good practices between countries in the region specifically. And I believe that's where I finish. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mario. Now moving on to Andrés Pirazzoli, CEO of Resilience. Good morning. Thank you so much, Leticia. My name is Andrés Pirazzoli, and I would like to thank OLADE and the Observatory for the invitation and the possibility to be here and sharing about the project that we're working on in line with what's been discussed during these days. So thank you so much. I will try to briefly present with much less data than my predecessors. We have a team of 5 people from different disciplines, and we are trying to take all of the effort that you are carrying out and other colleagues to international signals that are necessary to advance in the development of policies. Mainly, we are trying to take this effort to negotiation of the Framework Convention from the UN for climate change, particularly the Paris Agreement. We have a presence that matches the colleagues that preceded me. We have a presence in Chile, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, Panama, and Peru. And our main goal is to facilitate the inclusion of methane targets and other pollutants that are different to carbon dioxide and NDCs on one end, and on the other hand, to achieve in the very negotiations for us to have reinforced language that allows us to work from the international down to the domestic in methane mitigation and other gases different to CO2. The first thing I would like to remind that we are 10 years from the adoption of the Paris Agreement. I believe it's already been mentioned by some colleagues. And not everything is bad news. Actually, the implementation of the Paris Agreement has brought a change in trajectory. When we adopted the Paris Agreement 10 years ago, we were in a trajectory where we were overcome 4 degrees Celsius of increase in temperature, and the current trends show us that we are currently in a trajectory that continues being concerning, but that it approaches 2.7 degrees. Therefore, it is very useful, the implementation of the Paris Agreement, and we see methane as a facilitator to achieve the goals of temperature stabilization around 1.5 degrees. Another important situation, I don't know if you saw yesterday, but a consultative decision was issued from the International Court of Justice that refers precisely to international obligations of states before the impacts of climate change. And the fundamental element that the decision highlights is the duty of states to generate commitments which are a progressive advancement of their efforts. We are in the second iteration of contributions after the first global balance that was developed in 2023, and Section 4.3 of the Paris Agreement is very specific in pointing out precisely what was highlighted by the International Court of Justice yesterday, and this is that efforts must be progressive. So we are trying, on one hand, for the new contributions to include targets of methane, and also for the decision text that stem from the negotiation of the Framework Agreement and the Paris Agreement to pick up on reinforced language pertaining to these pollutants. For this purpose, we have been tracking the many work streams with subsidiary bodies of the negotiation and attempting to build text proposals which gather much of what's been discussed in the room during these days. On the other hand, we have been able to support leadership in the region. In the case of last year, supporting a declaration of ministries of environment in Latin America and the Caribbean that precisely stated that methane targets would be included in national contributions, and that it aimed to the last issue that mentioned my predecessors, and this is waste management and closing dumps and landfills, especially for reducing organic waste as a source of significant methane. Last year, I presided this forum in Chile. We had a very tight participation with them to achieve the declaration. This year, the chair is our current host, Peru, and we hope also to be able to aim to declarations that strengthen these commitments in the region. As I said, the decision from the International Court cements our normative expectation for methane to be included in country actions and commitments under the Paris Agreement, though there is no legally binding precedent that obliges all countries to do so. The first global balance does mention on the need to accelerate action with regards to methane emissions, particularly for the year 2030. Therefore, we are defending this normative expectation. As I said, it is not a precept that we can execute in a court as something legally binding, but to highlight that if countries have not included, for instance, methane targets in their original commitments in the first contribution they have made to the Paris Agreement, a normative expectation could be made so that in the following iteration that is expected to be presented around September, to include these methane targets. On the other hand, it could be interpreted as a regression in scrutiny process for the technical opinion of experts, or the second global balance that is expected at COP32, which would be probably in India. Where have we identified? Well, these are technicisms. I don't know if somebody in the room, anybody is participating actively in climate negotiations, but there are different elements where the main point could be included, and this is the working plan for mitigation that precisely tries to gather efforts and align all commitments with the global target for temperature increase under 1.5 degrees. This has shown, as mentioned by many colleagues who preceded me, that the discussion of funding has transformed into a fundamental discussion when we want to discuss any kind of climate action, and currently we are before a north-south relationship that might not mediating the support of implementation means nor financial means. Hardly will we be able to make progress on these matters that are more technical, where we see that, as I said, this matter can be included has to do with NDCs, and these are the commitments that countries provide to the Paris Agreement. The reinforced transparency framework that is very important here. Much has been discussed about data and information, where countries are generating it for monitoring, reporting, and verification of their efforts. And even here, the colleague from Chile mentioned on the possibility to access credits by these verifications whenever they happen. For that, it is necessary for this whole effort to be taken to international negotiation. And for now, there are some icebreakers, as mentioned here by the colleague, but it is necessary to take it to the subsidiary bodies of the convention, known as EPSIADI and SAPSTA, which are where these methodologies are developed and adopted for the total amount of parties to the Paris Agreement. So we are trying to bind, as I said, normative expectation norms on the commitments and transparency, taking it to the global balance so that not only does it mention methane in a single line, but to go a bit further with a fine thread on how the metrics and the guides that IPCC is making. And here the colleague from Stockholm Development Institute was talking about tiers of information. IPCC is the fundamental body that delivers the science for decision making to us, so it's also very important to give it attention. And lastly, the metric methodologies and best practices regarding working with methane. With this, I would simply like to thank you, and I will welcome your questions. Thank you so much, Andrés. We saw throughout yesterday and today on the initiatives that we are pushing for regionally. These initiatives are from the academic domain, from applied research and the strengthening of climate ambitions and transformation of industrial sectors. Moving on to open up the floor, if there are any questions for our panelists.
Si no hay, yo tengo preguntas.
If there are no questions, I have some.
¿Dónde? ¿Podemos acercarle, porfa, al micrófono?
Can we hand them the microphone, please? I do not see them. Then it's my turn. Thank you so much. Good morning. I'm Nino Toledo, promoter of development of intelligent in Peru, and I want to address Mario. Given that yesterday, by chance, I was told that Stockholm City is the top reference in Europe and probably worldwide for smart cities, and that they have made adequate considerations about precisely recycling, well, the considerations on methane also, which is the topic for this event. So please, Mario, thank you. Your comment regarding Stockholm. as a city? Well, thank you. To clarify that I am Colombian, the institute was founded in Stockholm, Sweden in 1989. I had the chance to travel there, but I'm not a resident of the city. But if there's something to mention, this is that Nordic countries in general, Europe and Nordics are a reference on sustainability matters, and many of the cases to be shown on implementation of sustainability policy or initiatives at the global level on what is being done well and wrong. In general, Sweden always stands out as one of those countries where the quality of life is excellent, organic waste management, and putting to use energy from open air landfills, as well as the use of methane power via wastewater is also a case to highlight, but I would not know what else to tell you. We have studied it a lot because Europe has such leadership in energy valuation, so this goes back to 3 centuries or more. In Europe, actually, the Nordic part, if you don't have heat, then you die. So using waste as a source of heat has been a habitual practice. And it has been found that that also generates process that contribute to circular economy and reducing direct methane emissions. So this has been an extra. Obviously, the way to burn waste in the past or to process it currently has changed all the technology. So culturally, Europe has had this need, and obviously this need has led it to become a leader in energy valuation, which is why I have no problem in setting goals in disappearing landfills by 2050. 20% tax, I believe that's by sending waste over $120 per ton only if you have power. So over costs that improper waste management is obvious. So I've had a pretty strong learning process with regards to energy valuation and processing. Basically, as we saw, 60% finally its hierarchy of waste is being resolved with energy valuation, but this is a cultural matter. We as a region, obviously, we don't need that heat to survive. Lima, we know, has a super stable temperature, and also the Amazon, so we don't have that complexity, save it's Patagonia or some cities in the highlands. So we have not been it's not been necessary to show that energy can be put to value when it has intrinsic value. Well, thank you, FICEM, for establishing this link between Stockholm and methane. Now, moving on to our next question.
Okay, Carlos Santana from Repsol Exploración, Peru. Yesterday we were talking about non-punitive encouragement, or as well as other type of purposes of these energetic companies. What are the opportunities of the government, and what's an intention of integrating these companies to this type of initiatives? We have private companies that have icebreaker projects. I think that that's relevant. But how does this integrate to the strategies as a country? I don't know if you have seen a case in this sort of reviews, or you know any type of experience. Well, I could start with the icebreaking question. In Peru, not necessarily Lima, we have signed an agreement between the local associations and the Ministry of Production. The decarbonization agenda in the industry, it's a responsibility from the Ministry of Production allocated in Peru. So they need to have actions for decarbonization, and they also notice that the complexity of sectors like, for example, steel, cement, chemical industries, all the solutions need to come from within. And that's actually a view, because the UN, AEA, they all share this view. And we're going to have to look for public policies that could support this. What we have determined for practical case for Peru in particular is that they need to be public procurement that would encourage low carbon cement. right? You would make the industry to transform their products because the market, the government are going to favor such type of product. Responsibility also includes an implementation of waste in their product, and that gives you a differential that you will not be able to cover comparing to the waste. And maybe this is not as successful, but I believe that this is a good way to go. Thirdly, I would talk about enabling Article 6.2. This is related to ITMOS projects. There's economies where the carbon, the coal's, price is high. Singapore, Germany. I think that they could enter a region with industrial projects that are technically defined. But what we need is support of the government of transferring these emissions towards the global north. And within the transitions and the cost, this is what we are facing in Peru. We have non-punitive initiatives that I believe that are the suitable ones. You could be punitive if you're trying to displace processes like energy and coal transportation. But you're not going to have that considering the environment or environment change. You're going to have the displacement of 10 sectors, cement into steel, to other economies such as China that would incorporate the ships transportation. And we also have, to sum up, actions that are not implemented, and it would generate a coal leakage. China consumes more than 5 tons per habitant, but I think that they could cover all the production of cement in Latin America. You have a port at 100 kilometers from here, and there's logistics involved, but then coal leakage and loss of local development and losing the potentials to value the waste would be the considerations that we're determining with governments. We have had good outcomes with Mexico, Brazil, Colombia. Productivity here is critical to show the climate variabilities, strategic variabilities as well. And it was obvious now, but 5 years ago, the cement in steel was not considered in conflict or armed conflicts. And now Germany is building tanks with steel. So definitely, considering the punitive question, we have success cases, for example, between Produce here in Peru and the industry of cement. I want to add something because this is a specific cases. So talking about punitive aspects, what we have seen in the region is that everything is voluntary, considering large companies trying to think about what's going to be the next movement on exporting the energetic renewables going into Europe. We have Petrobras in Brazil, for example. They are aligning such supra-governmental institutions such as Methane Pledge, and they are signing LP 2.0, which is not mandatory for each of the country, but it's related to the potential opening of markets that would imply exporting energetics into Europe. Yes, I don't want to waste this opportunity to mention that in the region, it is true that the non-punitive signs are important. Legislation signs are also important. We have good examples in the case of Chile. There is a climate change legislation that rules having legal framework on certain sectors that would mitigate the climate change. And this would give the proper signs that would be non-punitive for the private sector. Without having those plans, it would be very hard to move forward just based on being volunteers. And in the case in our region, we have a Chilean case, Peruvian case, but there's different institutional lines that involve introducing the private sector in a collaborative manner. We need to move forward on that sense, and maybe we need to go a little bit more specific on methane gas, because this has a role maybe for climate change, I think we have less than half involved with such gas, and we would have to incorporate this in the national legislation. We have carbon neutrality goals going into 2050, but the more pricing signs we could give, right? We were talking before about having a standard portfolio or any type of signal we could give to the market. I believe that that would be of benefit, and it would be easier for the private sector to be involved here. Thank you. Thanks to the three of you. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Thank you, everybody, by the way, for active listening. And with this, we will close our panel and we could continue with the agenda. Thank you.